when musicians get combined with something from film, and like you have something like the Pink Panthers theme, and people just hear
Right.
that track and they relate to a certain character immediately. And obviously, I'm sure you've seen on YouTube and all over that, people call it the governor's theme now.
Yeah.
And I wonder what that means to you, like that there's people that hear that song and immediately visualize the eye patch and everything.
Right. I think it's super cool. Obviously that's something I didn't plan on. The Walking Dead didn't really exist when the song was written. But it's nice when something, I don't know, the fact that I was a fan of the comic book and I was a big fan of the TV show, and then this song that I'd written that had nothing to do with it becomes so intimately combined to where, yeah, it's the governor's theme to some people. And that's great. Like I said, I wrote this song to be ambiguous in a way to where it could fit numerous stories for different people. And it happened to fit the governor's story perfectly. And so, yeah, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. It's cool that these worlds can kind of come together. And something that started with Blood Meridian worked its way onto this kind of acoustic Western album, and then worked its way into this, one of the biggest TV shows around at the time. The fact that something that kind of crazy can happen, I don't know, it makes life kind of fun. So yeah, the fact that it's the governor's theme is really cool.
How did AMC first approach you, to license the song?
I was a fan of the comic book when it first came out. I loved Tony Moore's art. And then I was a fan when they made it into a TV show. And I watched pretty religiously for at least for the first few seasons, definitely. So I got a call from my manager saying that Scott Gimple had a question about a song. And I remember I was running around doing errands. So I got the phone call and I was in a parking lot, just kind of walking around, talking on the phone to Scott Gimple, the showrunner of The Walking Dead. And I didn't really know what a showrunner was at the time. But later I kind of figured out they're kind of in charge. It's their vision. There's writers and there's directors, but it's the showrunner who's kind of keeping the whole thing on track. And he gave me one of the best compliments I've ever had. He said he'd written a lot of scenes for The Walking Dead listening to this Last Pale Light in the West record. And that, yeah, with me being such a big fan, that was just a really cool thing to hear. And so, yeah, he wrote this scene for the governor that was really tied to this song in a very specific way. And yeah, the fact that he was listening to the song that closely and that it inspired him to write this scene, man, as a songwriter, it doesn't get any better than that. So yeah, that was a great phone call to get.
Lyric "In My Veins," black pitch runs was supposed to indicate literally being pitch black, that you're roofless inside, that you've lost everything inside, or is it supposed to indicate some kind of drug like tobacco or heroin, or because there's so many ways you could take it. And especially when you see the governor, you see this person who's lost everything, a lot of it by his own hand, which kind of relates back to the whole drug idea of somebody doing self-inflicted pain to themselves.
Yeah, self-destructive.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, when I wrote the song, I wanted to leave it kind of vague, and I wanted it to be a little bit ambiguous, so that it could fit different listener stories, so that each listener could kind of make it their own, and that Through My Veins, black pitch runs could mean one thing to this person and something else to another. But yeah, I did want the song as a whole kind of captures this feeling of maybe being willing to give up, possibly being beyond redemption, being unsavable. And so that black pitch in your veins. To me, when I wrote it, I was thinking just, like the life force that runs through you is rotten, spoiled, contaminated, even maybe. There's an evil possibly that's inside of you. But yeah, there's obviously it would be a natural assumption to think it might reference drugs. But I wanted it to go beyond that, and be more, I don't know, timeless and more ambiguous. So I think in the end, it suited the governor's situation perfectly. It kind of summed up exactly where he was at that time when the governor's theme kind of plays. I wrote a song called "This Old Death," which actually ended up on the Walking Dead soundtrack, even though it was never used in the show. I wrote it for the show, and they were nice enough to include it on the soundtrack, and I'm proud of that song too. But he'd already had this scene kind of written in his head, and he knew exactly what he wanted, and it was hard to top "Last Pale Light in the West," the song for the scene. "This Old Death" was good, but the scene was written around "Last Pale Light in the West," and so yeah, it's spot on. It's one of those situations where everything just kind of clicks together real naturally.
Did you get to meet David Morrissey personally? And
no, I wish. No, this was all just done via, the internet and sending files back and forth. He'd obviously, Scott Gimple had already heard the song and written the scene. So really, we went through a process of me working on "This Old Death," which we thought we might use. But once he decided on "Last Pale Light in the West," it was just all in his hands, and it was just a matter of editing the song into the scene appropriately. So no, I never met Scott personally. It was all done over the phone and online. And I never met any of the actors, unfortunately. I would have been very starstruck. I would have been a little giddy. Oh yeah. I was a big fan of the show for sure. I haven't kept up in the recent seasons. But for the first 5 or 6 seasons, I watched very religiously. So yeah, at that point in time, it was that was one of the coolest things I'd ever been a part of is in my musical career. Having a song featured on The Walking Dead was a real big deal for me.
What was the recording process for it?
I recorded the song. I think that album came out in 2008. And I want to say it was 2013 or 2014 when this episode aired. So the record had been kind of floating around for a little while. And it's my first solo album. I'm in a band called Lucero, and I've done a lot of records with them, but this was my first time doing a solo project. And yeah, it was kind of a concept album, I guess, in that all the songs were based on this Blood Meridian novel. So it's a very stripped down song. The whole record's the same way. It's just mainly acoustic guitar with some piano or accordion and some pedal steel guitar.
How did you create that rustling noise at the beginning?
That was my guitar player, Todd Bean. And he had the pedal steel, but he also brought in his electric guitar. And he's one of those guys that has a gigantic pedal board with all sorts of effects. And there's some delay and some distortion. And I think he just kind of used it almost he used these pedals and the guitar to kind of come up with these almost synthesizer type noises, just atmosphere, kind of echoing, rumbling, cinematic type sounds. And this is, 5 years before we ever knew it might be used in any kind of film or TV show or anything. But I wanted it to have that kind of cinematic quality from the beginning. And yeah, he accomplished that through the wizardry of guitar pedals.
I know Sony's recently moved to doing stage it concerts, and you mentioned before how there's less opportunities now to tour around, obviously with COVID.
Right.
And I don't know what royalties are like these days, considering, songs are on every service and practically available for free. I actually paid, right. I remember for the song when it came out, but
Oh, thank you.
I'm curious. Yeah, I bought it right on iTunes after it aired.
Awesome.
I'm curious. What do you feel is the future of that? Let's say live music doesn't return to the way we imagine it with the
Right.
same crowds. I mean, do you get the same? It's hard for me to believe that doing live shows online gets the same amount of
It's not the same.
money and definitely less
And
experience.
right, the experience is different. Money wise, we've been able to coast by. We've only done a handful of live streams, but our audience has been supportive enough to where we've been able to continue to pay the bills. And in fact, we wrote and recorded a whole new Lucero album and released it just a couple months ago, called When You Found Me. And so that was all done during the pandemic, during quarantine. We actually wore masks in the recording studio, of course, unless I was singing, but we made it work. And that record's out now, and usually we'd be on tour, but we're not yet. We're starting to book some outdoor shows and things, and kind of thinking about the best way to move forward as safely as possible. But so there was enough money in the live streams to keep us afloat. But yeah, we took a hit for sure. It's not like a normal year. But the thing I miss most is, you don't have that connection with the audience. I miss playing in, sweaty, dark little dive bars where everybody's just right there together and you're, practically spitting on each other, which is, unimaginable right now. But everybody's just sweaty and singing along, and I miss those days quite a bit. I think we'll get back to them. I'm just not sure how long it'll take. I'm very optimistic about the vaccines, and hopefully we can kind of stay the course and everybody can continue to wear masks and be responsible and safe. The more diligent we are now, the quicker things will return to normal. And I do think they'll return to normal one day. But yeah, will the crowds be there? Hopefully. I think so. I think people are I think the audience and the listeners, I think they miss the live music just as much as performers do. I think everybody's kind of missing that connection. So hopefully it comes back as soon as possible.
What's the origins of the name Lucero?
The name Lucero just came from a Spanish-English dictionary. It was the 90s. We started in 1998. And I think my guitar player was working on a zine, kind of a, just a book of poetry and photographs and stuff that you just photocopy at Kinko's back in the old days before we all had computers and printers and everything. But he was looking for pretty sounding Spanish phrases. None of us speak Spanish, but he had a list of these phrases, and Lucero was one of the words that he'd written down. And I think we'd already booked our first show, and we didn't have a name, and we needed a name right then. And we looked on the list and we picked Lucero. And we're 22 years later, 23 years later, we're still using it. So there might be some confusion. I think there's a Mexican singer named Lucero, but if you go online and you see two Luceros, it's pretty easy to tell which Lucero you're looking at. She's got a much prettier voice than I do. Mine's much rougher around the edges. She probably doesn't smoke cigarettes and drink as much whiskey as I do.
You're working on a track and it's just not working out. Do you think if you work on it enough time, it'll eventually become good, or it's just better to scrap and start over?
It depends on the track. I've had some things, little like bits of music or one line of a lyric, and I've had them written down on a piece of paper for years and years, or this little piece of music recorded, and I've tried to work it into this song or tried to fit it onto this album, and it never quite matched up. But you never want to throw anything away, because they do find their own space in their own time. And some of these little things that you didn't think were worth much, they can come back and be exactly right for this music can match this lyric and this sentiment perfectly. Or you can just find another piece of music to go with it that then completes it. It's the artistic process is real sloppy. And so, yeah, you want to keep all those little bits and pieces because you never know when you're going to need that exact piece right there that you thought was worthless. It's good to be
puzzle kind of.
exactly. It's good to keep all the pieces, even if you've lost the rest of the puzzle. Keep that one piece, and yeah, you might find a place for it to fit one day.